The days had grown long and quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against the chest, heavy with absence and memory. Life had settled into a rhythm that felt safe, predictable, but numbing. Even the laughter of friends or the occasional invitation to gatherings carried a strange hollowness, as if there were a layer of glass between the heart and the world. It was a life of routine, of small comforts, and of evenings spent alone, wondering if desire and passion were things that belonged to someone else now, someone younger, someone untouched by years of solitude. Then he appeared, not in a dramatic entrance or with any fanfare, but simply, quietly, like a breeze shifting the curtains on a stale room. A younger neighbor moved in across the hall, and at first, it was nothing more than casual nods in passing, polite smiles, and the ordinary greetings exchanged between people who notice each other, but do not yet speak in the language of longing. Yet there was something in the way he carried himself, a gentle awareness, a patience in his movements, a softness in his eyes, that drew attention without even intending to. It began subtly, a glance lingering too long, a smile that reached those corners of the heart that had been locked away. There was no rush, no pressing urgency, just the quiet noticing of someone who seemed to belong to a different rhythm, yet somehow fit perfectly within the pauses of everyday life. His presence became an unspoken marker of anticipation, and without understanding how or why, it became impossible to move through the day without that quiet awareness of him nearby. At first it was little things, the accidental brushing of hands while collecting the mail, the shared laughter at some small, absurd coincidence in the hallway, or the way he always paused just long enough to ask how the day had been. Those moments, seemingly insignificant to anyone else, felt electric. Each word, each gesture, stirred something long dormant, awakening an emotional awareness that had been dulled by years of caution and self-protection. The heart, after years of careful restraint, began to respond again, beating in ways that were uncontainable, thrilling, and terrifying all at once. It was in the quiet of those small interactions that desire first began to make itself known. Not a loud, urgent craving, but a steady, insistent awareness that stirred the body and mind in tandem. A casual brush of fingers, a glance that held too long, or the way he seemed to notice things that no one else did. Each moment chipped away at the walls built around loneliness. There was an awakening in the chest, a sense of possibility that felt both exhilarating and frightening. The body remembered feelings that had been buried beneath routine, and the mind began to imagine touches and moments of intimacy that were both innocent and charged, a dangerous duality that made each encounter feel like a secret promise. The nights became restless, filled with recollections of his voice, his movements, the subtle warmth of presence that lingered even after he had left. There was a longing that went beyond mere attraction. It was a hunger for connection, for being seen in ways that had been forgotten. It was not just physical. It was the kind of longing that lives in the chest, pressing against ribs and heartbeat, demanding attention and recognition. Each interaction, no matter how small, became a thread weaving a tapestry of anticipation, curiosity, and quiet desire. And yet, the awakening was not simple or linear. There was hesitancy, a careful measuring of emotions, an awareness of boundaries that could not be crossed too hastily. The mind reminded of years past, of experience, of the safe distance maintained from fleeting pleasures that never stayed. But the heart, stubborn and insistent, began to pull in another direction, toward a possibility that was intoxicating in its potential. There was a tension, palpable and almost unbearable at times, between restraint and surrender, observation and action, that made every shared glance and accidental touch resonate far beyond the moment itself. Even mundane encounters took on a new significance. When he asked about a book left on a table or mentioned a favorite show, it was no longer just conversation. It was connection, an intimate sharing of small details that mattered in ways neither could fully articulate. The quiet awareness of being seen, truly seen, began to melt away the armor around the heart, layer by cautious layer. Each smile and fleeting brush of contact became a reminder that life still held surprises, that desire and longing were not things of youth alone, but could awaken with gentle persistence, with attention and with care. There was also the physical awareness that came unbidden, subtle but undeniable. The warmth of his hand near mine, the way he leaned in slightly when speaking, or the effortless grace in the curve of his smile, all of it elicited a stirring, a bodily memory of sensations long left behind. It was thrilling and disorienting, an awakening that seemed almost forbidden because it had been so long since the heart and body had been so aligned in anticipation. Each day became a delicate balancing act, a dance of noticing without overstepping, of yearning without confessing, yet feeling every pulse and brush of energy with acute intensity. And slowly, imperceptibly at first, desire became undeniable. The quiet loneliness of previous years gave way to an urgent emotional vitality, a sensation of being fully alive in the presence of someone who seemed to awaken what had lain dormant. Every gesture, every glance, every simple interaction became a conduit for something more profound than mere attraction. It became a dialogue of longing, curiosity, and recognition, a language without words that spoke directly to the heart and body. In those early days, nothing needed to be rushed. The awakening itself was intoxicating, a journey through emotions, memories, and sensations that had been carefully tucked away. The quiet anticipation of seeing him, the awareness of touch and proximity, and the slow blooming of emotional intimacy created a tension that was almost unbearable in its sweetness. And in that tension, there was life, there was hope, there was the undeniable evidence that desire and connection, once awakened, cannot be ignored or contained. Every encounter left a mark, subtle yet indelible. A fleeting brush of hands, a meaningful glance, a soft word spoken in passing. It all built towards something that felt inevitable, something powerful and consuming, and yet delicate and precise. It was the kind of desire that honors vulnerability, that thrills in the awakening of long, buried emotions, that makes the heart ache and the body respond with a force that cannot be denied. And so, with each passing day, what had begun as quiet noticing became an undeniable force, a rising tide of emotion and physical awareness that could no longer be ignored or contained. The heart, long silent, began to speak again, and every fiber of being seemed alive with anticipation, longing, and the slow, steady realization that life had offered a second chance at being fully, deeply, and sensually alive. It was in those moments, in the subtlety of presence and the intimacy of attention, that the heart finally knew what it had been missing, and it could never return to quietness again. It started with small exchanges that felt inconsequential at the time, ordinary conversations in hallways or brief moments over shared errands, but there was a rhythm to them, a subtle cadence that lingered in the mind long after they ended. Words were chosen carefully, lightly, yet carried an undercurrent of something more. Humor became the first bridge, a gentle laughter shared over trivial things, a dropped coffee cup, a joke about the weather that left a warmth behind, spreading slowly through the chest, teasing at emotions that had long been quiet. Each conversation built upon the last, and the familiarity that grew did not feel forced but inevitable. It was in the way he remembered small details, a passing comment about a favorite book or a song, the way he asked about a day that had been tough or celebrated one that had been good. The attentiveness was effortless yet deliberate, and it drew the heart closer in ways that were both thrilling and terrifying. There was an awareness of him noticing everything, not in a loud or obvious way, but in the quiet attention that made each moment shared feel uniquely personal, as if the rest of the world fell away and left only the two of them suspended in a private orbit. Physicality came next in the subtlest of forms, a hand brushing against mine as a gesture of reaching for the same item, the accidental touch that lingered just slightly longer than necessary, the closeness that happened naturally when standing side by side. Each touch was small, almost imperceptible, yet each carried a weight, a silent message that spoke volumes without a single word. The body remembered sensations long forgotten, stirring in tandem with the heart, building a tension that was electric yet patient. It was never rushed. It was deliberate in its slowness, allowing desire to grow alongside trust, letting intimacy weave itself into the spaces between gestures and glances. Vulnerability began to show in the quiet moments, in the pauses between words and the stories shared that were never meant for casual ears. Confessions of past regrets, fears, and joys were offered with a tentative hope, a soft bravery that invited the same openness in return. The act of sharing became its own intimate rhythm, a silent agreement that each moment of exposure would be met with care and understanding. There was a magic in that slow revelation, a power in being seen and accepted fully, flaws and all, and it deepened the connection in a way that was both emotional and physical. The heart opened incrementally, layer by layer, and with each small disclosure came a surge of closeness that was intoxicating in its subtlety. There were times when laughter would give way to a momentary pause, a shared silence that said more than words ever could. Standing together in the kitchen or sitting across from one another at a cafe, there was a sense of electricity in the stillness. The air seemed to vibrate softly, charged with anticipation, the kind that makes a hand tremble slightly when it brushes against another, the kind that quickens the pulse without the need for declaration. Each encounter became a dance of unspoken acknowledgement, a slow push and pull that teased at desire without demanding immediate fulfillment. Even mundane tasks became moments of intimacy. Running errands, tending to plants on the balcony, or simply organizing a shared corner of space transformed into interactions laced with tension and warmth. The smallest gestures, a passing look, a shared joke, a tilt of the head, carried an emotional resonance that grew with each repetition. There was a sense that every action mattered, that every touch and word was part of a gradual layering of connection that, when observed as a whole, was almost unbearably tender. Time seemed to bend in those moments, stretching minutes into hours, leaving each encounter feeling weighty and significant. The gradual unfolding of the relationship created a sense of anticipation that was deliciously unbearable. Waiting for the next smile, the next conversation, the next subtle brush of skin became a source of daily exhilaration. Each meeting built upon the last, deepening both emotional intimacy and physical awareness, intertwining in ways that made it impossible to separate the heart from the body. Desire was no longer just an abstract feeling. It became a presence, palpable and undeniable, simmering beneath the surface, ready to rise at the slightest spark. And yet, there was a careful patience to it all. Nothing was forced, nothing rushed. The slow, burning nature of the connection allowed trust and emotional depth to anchor the attraction, giving every touch, every glance, and every shared secret an intensity that would have been impossible if hurried. There was a thrill in restraint, in the waiting, in the conscious awareness of each heartbeat and each brush of warmth. Desire was cultivated alongside intimacy, nurtured with attention and care until the tension between them became almost unbearable, a sweet ache that both terrified and delighted. Even as the physical awareness grew, it never overshadowed the emotional intimacy. The connection was not merely about desire, It was about recognition, about being understood in ways that had been absent for years. Each touch carried the weight of shared laughter, of whispered confidences, of glances that spoke of understanding and longing. The body and heart responded together in a synchronized rhythm that felt ancient and inevitable, as if the universe had conspired to make this slow unfolding of closeness possible. And when moments of near contact finally came, the anticipation magnified every sensation. A hand resting lightly on a shoulder, a brush of fingers in passing, or a closer proximity that lingered just long enough to be noticed, each became a confirmation of the connection, a tangible proof that the slow burn had built something real, something powerful, something that could no longer be contained. Every nerve ending seemed awake, every breath a little quicker, every heartbeat a reminder that love and desire, when allowed to grow carefully, could become overwhelming in their intensity. By the time the first real act of surrender happened, it was neither shocking nor sudden. It was the culmination of months of attention, laughter, shared vulnerability, and electric touches that had intertwined in ways that left both hearts and bodies inextricably linked. The slow, burning connection had created an intimacy that was as emotional as it was physical, a depth that was almost frightening in its completeness. Each kiss, each lingering caress, each whispered word of recognition became a testament to the power of patience, to the way that emotional closeness amplifies desire, and to the truth that when hearts are opened gradually, the resulting passion can be incendiary. And in that awakening, there was no turning back. Every glance, every touch, every shared laughter from that moment onward carried the weight of everything that had come before, a reminder of the beauty and intensity of a connection built carefully, deeply, and with unwavering attention. It was in the slow burn that the heart finally understood what it had been missing, and it could never go unnoticed again. The first time it happened, it was almost imperceptible. A hand brushing against mine in the kitchen, a lingering glance that held more than it should, a gentle squeeze on the shoulder after a difficult conversation. At that moment, it wasn't about lust or craving. It was about trust, the fragile and dangerous kind that comes when someone sees the parts of you you've hidden even from yourself. It was electrifying and terrifying because in that small touch there was a promise that whatever fear or longing existed could be held safely, even celebrated. Every interaction after that seemed charged with a new awareness. Conversations that had once been casual took on weight, a depth that both invited closeness and demanded honesty. The first time laughter softened into silence, a pause pregnant with emotion, it became clear that physical connection was no longer separate from the emotional one. A simple touch, a casual leaning into the same space, a soft brush of fingers, all of it became a language in itself. It was as if the body could speak what words often fail to express, revealing desires and fears that had been buried, locked away by years of solitude and caution. It wasn't sudden. There was no rush, no dramatic confession, no immediate surrender. The passion came quietly, in the spaces between words and gestures, in the gentle understanding that each layer of vulnerability was met with care, never judgment. There were nights when hands met in the dark, tentative, exploratory, and yet charged with emotion so intense that even the smallest gesture made the heart race. Every caress traced not just skin, but the contours of the soul, revealing hidden corners where longing and fear coexisted. The vulnerability was mutual. There was an unspoken agreement that each moment of openness would be honored, that the confessions of past mistakes, the trembling admissions of desire, the whispered uncertainties about the future, all would be received without ridicule or dismissal. That honesty transformed the physical connection, turning each embrace into a revelation, each kiss into an act of trust. To be touched in this way was to be understood in a language older than words, where each heartbeat and breath carried meaning. It was breathtaking in its intimacy, a hand resting lightly on an arm, a brush of the cheek with a fingertip, a lingering hug at the end of a conversation. Each moment became an exploration of both body and soul. The thrill wasn't in novelty, but in recognition, in the knowledge that each action was met with attention, care, and mirrored feeling. Desire was no longer separate from love. It was interwoven, inseparable from the emotional honesty that had been cultivated with patience. There were moments when fear threatened to overwhelm, when the intensity of the connection made the chest tighten and the mind race. But each time, the vulnerability was met with reassurance, a gentle grounding in presence and understanding. The trust that had been built allowed the passion to exist without shame, without hesitation. There was no need to hide, no need to pretend. The body, finally, could speak freely, and the heart could respond with abandon. The physical intimacy became a map of emotions, a cartography of desire and fear, pleasure and trepidation. Fingers traced lines not only across skin, but across memory, across years of longing and loneliness. A kiss became more than a kiss. It was a validation, a celebration of trust, a declaration that the heart could feel fully without holding back. Every whisper, every gentle touch, every lingering embrace became a testimony to the power of emotional honesty to amplify passion. It was in the quiet moments that the truth of the connection was most evident. Sitting together on a sofa, hands intertwined, sharing stories and confessions, there was a tension that hummed beneath the surface. The proximity of bodies mirrored the closeness of hearts, and the awareness of each other's breathing, the brush of skin against skin, was a constant reminder that intimacy is not merely physical. It is the echo of being known and accepted completely. Even when words failed, the body spoke. A lean into a shoulder, a fingertip trailing down an arm, a hand brushing hair from the face. These gestures conveyed a depth of feeling that transcended language. Each touch invited a response. Each embrace demanded trust. Each whisper asked for honesty. The passion that grew from these interactions was slow, deliberate, and consuming, the kind of intensity that makes every heartbeat count, every breath a shared secret. It was not just about desire, it was about revelation. The physical connection became a mirror for the soul, reflecting fears, longings, and hidden parts of oneself that had never been seen before. The heart responded in tandem with the body, creating a feedback loop of emotion and sensation so powerful it was almost overwhelming. The hands and lips and embraces were never random. They were invitations, confirmations, and reassurances all at once. In that exchange, vulnerability was a gift, and passion was the natural consequence. There were nights when the closeness became almost unbearable, the tension so thick it could be cut with a breath. Sitting together in dim light, the world outside fading away, the subtle touches and whispered confessions created a space where time seemed suspended. Every heartbeat, every shiver, every gentle press of skin against skin was a testament to the way trust transforms desire. The connection became immersive, an experience that enveloped mind, body, and spirit, leaving no room for pretense or fear. And in the culmination of those moments, when hands rested fully on one another, when whispers became urgent murmurs, when lips met with the full weight of emotion behind them, it was clear that nothing could ever replicate that intimacy. The merging of passion and vulnerability created something eternal, a recognition that true desire is never fully physical, never fully emotional. It is the perfect balance of both, the mirror of hearts that have dared to open completely. Every caress, every embrace, every whisper became a confirmation that love, in its most profound form, is inseparable from trust. To be touched in this way was to be known, to be held, and to be seen. And in that knowledge, the heart surrendered fully, not out of need, but out of recognition that the awakening of desire is only complete when vulnerability is honored and celebrated. In the intertwining of bodies and hearts, it became undeniable. The power of trust is the power of passion, and nothing in the world could ever replicate the way it feels to be fully seen, fully desired, and fully alive. It was impossible to predict the way a single encounter could unravel everything held carefully for years. There had been a rhythm to life, slow and predictable, where days bled into nights with little more than routine and quiet reflection. Desire and longing had become faint echoes, buried beneath responsibilities, disappointments, and the kind of solitude that numbs even the sharpest edges of the heart. Yet in that ordinary afternoon, everything shifted, not with loud declarations, but with the subtle intensity of attention that made the world pause. It began with a glance, the kind that carries more than curiosity or politeness. It was the awareness in his eyes, the patience in the way he listened, the way he seemed to notice every detail without needing it pointed out. A subtle brush of fingers as he handed over a book, a shared smile that lingered just long enough to leave a warmth in the chest. These small gestures began to stir something long thought dormant. The heart, which had grown cautious over the years, recognized what it had been missing, attention, genuine and unhurried, that made one feel fully seen and wholly valued. Conversations that followed were never rushed. They unfolded slowly, like pages of a long, forgotten diary being opened one by one. There was laughter, quiet and unguarded, spilling easily over mundane anecdotes and small observations. There was honesty, too, the kind that comes when someone trusts enough to reveal fears, regrets, and past hurts. And in that honesty, a fragile intimacy grew, delicate yet insistent, whispering promises that the heart had almost stopped believing it could feel. Each shared secret became a thread, weaving together emotional connection with a power that neither could have anticipated. The physical presence of him, subtle, respectful, and yet magnetic, was transformative. A hand brushing against the arm while reaching for the same item, leaning closer to hear a whispered comment, the gentle warmth of a shoulder against the back, each contact, no matter how small, carried a weight. It was not about urgency or need, but about recognition, about the quiet power of being touched in ways that affirm worth and awaken long, suppressed desire. Every encounter left a lingering echo, a tremor that could not be ignored, a pulse in the chest that reminded that life could feel vivid and thrilling again. There were moments when emotion surged so strongly it became overwhelming. Sitting together on a worn sofa, the world outside fading into insignificance, there was an awareness of proximity that made the heart race and breath catch. Hands intertwined almost unconsciously, fingers tracing tentative paths along arms and knuckles, lips hovering close enough to feel the warmth but not quite meeting. In that space, desire and longing were inseparable from trust and emotional intimacy. It was a revelation. To be seen so completely, to be desired so wholly, was transformative, altering every perception of self and of what love could be. The awakening was not sudden, but it was relentless. Every gentle word, every attentive gesture, every quiet laugh carved away at old walls, leaving the heart exposed and alive. Nights became restless with thought, imagination, and longing, replaying small touches and smiles over and over, memorizing the cadence of his voice and the curve of his smile. It was as if each interaction sent ripples through the soul, carrying pieces of a life that had been dulled by routine and reigniting the vibrant, aching need for connection. Vulnerability became a language of its own. Sharing fears, memories, and the subtle yearnings of the heart became entwined with the physical closeness that had begun to form naturally. Every caress, every brushing of skin, every whisper was both a question and an answer, a question asking if it was safe to want, and an answer proving that desire, when met with understanding and care, could be celebrated rather than feared. The body and heart responded in harmony, each sensation amplified by the emotional honesty that had been nurtured slowly, deliberately, and with intention. Even ordinary moments carried the weight of transformation. A shared cup of coffee, a walk along a quiet street, an unspoken glance over a book, each became a conduit for awareness, a way to feel connected on levels that had been forgotten. The awakening was not merely about passion, it was about the recognition that one's own heart was capable of feeling deeply and fully after so many years of silence. It was about rediscovering the power of desire, longing, and intimacy intertwined with trust, attention, and care. There were nights when the intensity of the connection became almost unbearable. Sitting close, hands brushing, voices lowered to intimate confessions, there was a tension that hummed in the air. It was sweet, electric, and entirely consuming. The heart, once dulled by time and caution, now raced with anticipation at the smallest touch, the slightest attention, the subtlest word. Desire and longing had converged, overwhelming in their force, yet tempered by the safety and care that had been meticulously built. It was an awakening that reshaped perception, revealing that love and desire could coexist with gentleness, patience, and authenticity. In time, every brush of his hand, every shared smile, every lingering moment of presence became proof that transformation was possible. The heart, once guarded, was now open, attuned to both emotional and physical connection in ways that felt boundless and infinite. Long, suppressed desires flowed freely, mingling with gratitude, joy, and an exhilaration that left the chest vibrating with life. There was no going back to the quiet, numb existence of before. The awakening had changed everything, leaving the soul richer, fuller, and profoundly alive. And in that transformation, it became clear that the power of genuine attention, touch, and deep emotional connection could awaken a heart thought long lost, and nothing would ever feel the same again. Thank you for sharing this journey of heart and desire. If these stories stirred something within you, hit that like button, subscribe, and join our growing family of hearts who embrace love, longing, and deep connection. Every story is a reminder that feeling deeply is a gift. Don't miss the next chapter of passion, trust, and awakening.